Good morning. Welcome. Take your seat. We're going to get started. I'm Judy Samuelson. I run the Business and Society program here at the Institute, but out of New York. Glad you're all here to tackle maybe what is the issue on all of our minds. This morning's session is Where are the Jobs in America's Future? And we're very lucky to have a remarkably diverse panel on this subject this morning to help us delve in. And we have a real pro, of course, to help us lead the discussion. Paul Solman, award-winning journalist, we all know from his role as the business and economics correspondent for PBS NewsHour. You don't recognize him because he has his hat on. Because he's cold. Okay.
Freezing in here.
So we're going to turn it over to Paul to start us off this morning. We're glad you're all here, and I don't think there are any other special announcements. And so, Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Judy. Please, this is the first time I've ever moderated anything or spoken wearing a hat, but I decided that discretion was the better part of warmth. So I'm sticking with the hat and the South American drug lord look. Although you shouldn't read into that any meaning, just a joke. Yeah, that's right. Don't worry about a thing, Rich. It'll be all right. I was asked to make some preliminary remarks, but I think I'm going to keep them super brief, and I can sort of interject questions and remarks as we go. The one thing that I think is most striking, because it's clear enough that we have a jobs problem, and you hardly need me to harangue you or remind you of all the details, but just to bring us up to date, at the moment, the latest unemployment statistics in this country is supposedly the official rate you hear is 9.5%, went down last month, right, from 9.7 to 9.5. But I've done a lot of work on this, and the most inclusive official unemployment number is U6, unemployment 6. So what you hear is U3. U6 is now at 16.5%. That includes everyone who has not looked for work in the last week when they were surveyed, but did at some point in the last year, last month, last year, and people who are part-time looking for full-time. The official phrase is part-time for economic reasons. That's 16.5%. Last month, 842,000 people, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They sample, so these numbers should be taken with a grain of salt or maybe even a shaker. But the official number is 842,000 people left the workforce. Because in that U6, they do not count people who have stopped looking for work in the past year. In other words, for a year, haven't looked for work in a year. Those people are not counted in the labor force at all, right? So it's 16.5% plus those people is what we're talking about here. When I was just in Spain, it was unemployment was 20%, and people were saying, well, it isn't really that high because there's a lot of underground economy. 20%, people in Spain were saying, would be just unbelievable. Spain, this is Spain, which is going through all kinds of rack and ruin at the moment. And so that's the kind of number we have here. And one more data point, which is almost half of the unemployed have been out of work for 27 weeks or more. And if you look at a simple chart of how that tracks historically, that spikes in a way that you can't possibly avoid. So that's where we are at the moment, okay? And we'll get into all kinds of issues around that. The panel, I will read from their biographies. I don't know how many people have read the booklet or not, but these are very well done, and I think this is also what people would like themselves to be represented as. So Tom Donahue over there, President and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce since '97, has built the Chamber into a lobbying powerhouse with influence across the globe. Hey, that's what it says. And it's true, by the way, it's true. Donahue has advanced a competitiveness agenda that includes doubling U.S. exports in 10 years, strengthening capital markets, they could use a little of that, forging a national energy strategy, reforming healthcare and education, and protecting intellectual property rights. He spearheaded the American Free Enterprise Dream Big campaign to defend, protect, and advance a free enterprise system. Under his leadership, Chambers became a major player in politics, helping elect congressional pro-business candidates through financial support and voter activism. Serves on the boards of Union Pacific, Sunrise Senior Living Corporation, previously president and CEO of the American Trucking Associations. Take a deep breath and move on to Jeffrey Pfeffer, the professor at Stanford Business School, where he also went to school, right? And he's been teaching there as a full professor since 1979. And he says he's just, he hasn't died, but he's gone to heaven. He's co-authored 13 books on topics including power, managing people, evidence-based management, and the knowing-doing gap. In 2000, lectured in 34 countries, visiting professor at London Business School, Harvard Business School, Singapore Management University, and IESE in Barcelona, served on the board of directors of several human capital software companies, as well as other profit and nonprofit boards. If you think that isn't impressive enough, we have Hilda Solis, Secretary of Labor. Welcome. You were Congresswoman, 32nd District in California, says here, for how many years?
8.
8 years, recognized leader in clean energy jobs. She co-authored the Green Jobs Act. Solis became the first woman to receive the JFK Profile and Courage Award in 2000 for her pioneering work on environmental justice issues. 2007, appointed to the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Helsinki Commission, as well as the Mexico-U.S. Interparliamentary Group. Elected vice chair of the Helsinki Commission's General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights, and Humanitarian Questions, the only U.S. elected official to serve on the committee throughout her career in public service, which also included being in the California House, right? Served as authored a record 17 state laws, that's where you did that, aimed at combating domestic violence. And finally, the only person here I think I've interviewed on the NewsHour, just one-on-one, Richard Trumka, president of the AFL-CIO, and previously served as secretary-treasurer for 15 years. And I love this write-up. And he likes this too. We communed on this before. As a boy in a small coal mining community in southwest Pennsylvania in the 60s, Trumka used to complain bitterly about how badly miners were treated. What do you plan to do about it, his grandfather would ask. I could be a politician, Rich replied. His grandpap, Fane, says here, Fane smacking him across the back of the head. Chastened, young Trumka offered a second opinion. I could be a lawyer and stand up for workers' rights. His grandfather, a longtime miner, allowed that this was a better idea, but added, if you want to help workers, you first need to help people. This has been the encompassing vision of Trumka's leadership in the labor movement. Unions must uplift everybody in their pursuit of fair treatment for workers, as they did in building the world's strongest middle class, and as they must once again by restoring job growth and prosperity for working people. So that's who's here. What we're going to do is go across, again in alphabetical order, with just a few opening remarks so you get a sense of where people are, the people on the panel, with respect to the issue at hand. Where are the jobs in America's future? Tom Donahue, you're first.
Well, we've agreed we're sort of going to go back and forth here, so let me start with what I think are 3 or 4 factoids that we'd all agree with. We all agree, because you laid out the numbers, that we have an unemployment number that is quite a bit higher than the 9+%, whatever it is, for all of the reasons you indicated. I think we could, in a quick moment, all agree that over the next 10 years, we need 20 million jobs. We need 20 million jobs first to replace the 8-9 million people that are unemployed, and then just looking at the people that will be coming into the workforce, expanding population, growing workforce, we need another 12, 13, 14, not sure. So round numbers, you need about 20 million jobs, and I think without getting into who does what, that's a fairly rational number that people could rally around. The third thing that I would suggest from history and from basic economics, that a 3% economic growth, which is, we're not going to be quite there. We adjusted back in the last quarter. But let's say that we can, for the year, get 3 or a little bit over, because we're picking up a little bit. 3% economic growth will not create jobs. I mean, you'll get a few jobs here and there. You might, over the course of the year, get 300,000 net jobs or something. And how do we know that? Because we've seen it a lot of times. When we come out of recessions over the years, you'd pop up to 4, 5, 6% growth for a quarter or two, and that's when everyone went back in and invested in the jobs. And so we've got to figure out how to get the economic growth number to a place that would create jobs. So I would sum up my quick look at these numbers by saying that I think we're going to have a very modest recovery, but for now, and I'll give a lot of suggestion of why later, but for now, we're having a recovery without very many jobs, and the problem with that is it's going to drive up deficits, it's going to require more federal spending, it's going to keep more people in a very uncomfortable, unfair position from all of our perspectives. And so my suggestion is, if we could agree on some of these fundamental numbers, the next thing we ought to talk about is, what do we do to get 3% to be 4%, 5%, 6%, because that is the only thing we're going to do to create the jobs, and reality stinks, but that's it.
Yeah, and just as a slight add-on, I remember doing a series for the NewsHour in 2003 that was called The Jobless Recovery. That's the first time I started looking at the broader numbers than just U3, so that's what I first...
It was a very interesting thing about that 2003 recovery. That was the first time in many, many years. All the recoveries before that, they were spring recoveries. You jumped up 4 or 5 or 6%. But 2003, it took many years to get those jobs to come back because they didn't get that accelerated growth.
Well, what was so striking from a reporter's point of view is this notion that the jobless recovery is not just a phrase that you'd use at one point in time. It now seems to be a generalization. Jeffrey.
Well, I would make 3 points. The first is that everybody in this room, if you have not done so, should read Andy Grove's article in the most recent issue of Business Week, or now Bloomberg Business Week.
Yes, there's the cover.
Mr. Grove points out that the job problem and the job creation problem in this country is decades old, that this is not just an issue of the current economy and the recession. The recession obviously has made things much worse and taken a lot of people out of existing jobs, but our problem of job growth has existed truly for decades. Grove points out something that I think people in this room would find shocking, that take an industry that is kind of a quintessential US industry, the computer industry, and according to Grove, who has the charts and data, of course, to back it up, the United States employs fewer people in the computer industry today than we did in 1975. So this is not just an issue of we're going to find new industries and create jobs out of the new industries. This is a long-standing problem, and it is not just a problem in quotes, old industries like, iron and steel or coal or something. This is a problem throughout the economy. That's the first thing I would point out. Secondly, I've had the privilege of working with the Ministry of Manpower in Singapore and a variety of other countries around the world, and I would say there is a fundamental difference in the risk of oversimplifying between the US and many of the other countries in which I've had the privilege of working and spending some time. And that is, for the most part, the other countries in public policy and business people actually care about working people and human beings, and in this country we care about the stock market. And if the market is up and the in quotes numbers are up, but there are people on the street or people working in jobs that are bad jobs or not well-paying jobs, we think we're still doing fine. And this is a real contrast, and it is certainly a contrast from from some of that. And the third and final point I would make is that I am not sure that the business leaders in this country, many of whom I guess were training at Stanford, and I may have trained over my 30 years at Stanford, I'm not sure that they have necessarily the right values or even the right veridical view of what makes companies or countries successful. I was at a conference recently where a very prominent and very well-known CEO of an enormous money management firm made the following comment. He said, well, the economy is moving in the right direction. He said, think about what we've been able to accomplish in the auto industry. He said, obviously there was some huge pain, but at the end of all this restructuring of General Motors and Chrysler, who went through bankruptcy, we now have auto workers that are making $14 an hour, and that's less than they make in Mexico. And he took this as a sign of progress. And I was, of course, quite stunned by this, that we would think that progress is getting our wage levels down. There is no evidence, if you look at the Economist Intelligence Unit list of the most competitive economies, or the World Economic Forum list of the most competitive economies, or within the US, the correlation between labor rates and profitability, that you have to be low wage in order to be a successful economy. Denmark rates very high, even though it pays high wages. Germany has a positive balance of trade with the rest of the world, even though it's a relatively high wage country. But we have this view that competitiveness requires us to become, I don't know, like Bangladesh or Uganda or I don't know what. And that is empirically incorrect. But I was also quite struck by this idea that we have made progress by restructuring wages so that people are now more at risk and have more kind of bad working conditions.
Another upbeat Aspen panel, as you can see. I'm sure it's only going to get more encouraging as we move left.
Oh my.
Secretary Solis, I'm frightened to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and this is a great location because if you look around our surroundings here, someone had the know-how and technology and work ethic to preserve what we have here. It takes money, it takes research, it takes dollars and policy, and people to put places like this together. This is also something that I think is intertwined in where our future is going to rest, and that's in renewable energy. And while we've lost our manufacturing base, granted we're a service industry, we're very consumption-oriented, now we have to push back and say what kinds of policies are going to work for middle-class families, and really putting people back to work in a meaningful way, not just for a job, but for a career. And in just recent times, traveling around the country this last year and a half, it's been exciting to see the ingenuity and the tenacity and fortitude of our American workers. I've had time spent up in Northeast watching what happened to the devastation in Flint, Michigan, and other places. Now to see that we have new sources of technology going in, hybrid plants, lithium batteries, different resources that are coming together because the government said, guess what, we're going to loosen up research tax credits, but we're also going to incentivize businesses to start going that extra mile. And I see that while job growth may not be as rapid, we are starting to see some movement there. And just yesterday, I was out in Pueblo Community College visiting with some folks there and looking at what opportunities are going to be available for job training. And without a doubt, we have to have people that have more than a high school education. You can't just go out and get a job now and be competitive. You have to have some basis. And for our future here in the United States, I think we have to think about that. And the President has done that through major investments in higher education, through the community college system, and also making it more affordable by allowing some of our young people to be able to afford to go to college. I mean, that was part of our American dream, and everybody expected that. But now how many people are seeing their youngsters or their siblings not being able to finish out their graduate degrees or complete their college degrees? So I think one of the things that I would say to you is that we really need to continue to focus on America's workforce. We have many, many individuals who lost their jobs that are over 40, 45, 50 years old, the baby boomer population. that is ill-prepared to come back into the workforce. So we have to spend some money, and that's the deficit side that people don't want to talk about, but making an investment in new technology or retraining up people for other skills and incentivizing small business and manufacturers to take advantage of some of the training programs that we have just issued, which is on-the-job training. We'll subsidize training and education for an employer if they want to somehow bring up the skill sets of their employees. And I saw this yesterday visiting one of our community colleges here, who's a recipient of a $2 million grant, working with a corporation who's now building turbine windmills. And I'm wearing one of their little displays here, because I think that, you know, that in part is where the future is going to be. It still requires someone to have skills in math and science, maybe not as high level, but we still need welders. We still need people to create the product, to manufacture it, to assemble it. And my concept is I'd like to see more cooperation with us, business and labor, working to see that we really put American workers first and make them the priority here, so that they have good paying jobs but safe jobs as well. And we've really pulled out, I think, a lot to say that it isn't enough just to have a job. It has to be better than that. It has to be a good paying job, not a race to the bottom, not to compete with other countries where we're going to lower wages, that we can try to keep some of those jobs here. Let's send our products out, but let's have fair trade practices, not free, fair, so that we don't disadvantage manufacturers here in the United States.
So Rich, how do we do that? I mean, clearly that's all great, and we'd all like that to happen. I think everybody in the panel, everybody in the room. Does this mean spending money? What does it mean?
I want to pick up on a point that Jeffrey made. For the last almost 40 years, our country's pursued a low-wage, high-consumption strategy. And so if you start back in 46, from 46 to 73 in this country, productivity doubled, and so did wages. So at that period of time, the interesting thing, the people in the bottom two quartiles during that period of time, their wages were actually increasing faster than the people at the top, so the wage gap in this country was being shrunk at that time. And we had about 37.5% collective bargaining density back then. So profits...
What is collective bargaining density?
37.5% of the employees were represented by a union that could bargain and actually share profits, and it was being shared pretty evenly back then. From 73 to date, productivity has continued up, but wages have stagnated. And so to compensate for that, workers have gone through 4 or 5 different strategies. First, we started working more overtime, and that didn't keep pace with things. And then we sent a second person out into the workforce, so if individual wages couldn't stand up, family wages would try to stay at a level. The third thing we did when that didn't keep up was start getting a second or a third job. And all of those things didn't work, but we got sort of lucky in the early 90s, and we had the high-tech bubble. So people felt richer. They had wherewithal, they had resources, and they could borrow. And so they did. So the high-tech bubble busted, and then you had the housing bubble come up. And my $100,000 house is now worth $200,000, so I could borrow. And we borrowed, and we kept consumption up. Our economy's 72% driven by consumption right now. And so if you're going to start demand, you have to put money in people's pockets to get them to be able to spend, not borrow, because that doesn't work. So you can't have a low-wage, high-consumption strategy because it doesn't work. It runs its strain, and we've done that in this country. And the result of those policies are we now have about 15 million people unemployed today. We have 25 million who are either, you call it U6, it's underemployed. That doesn't include the people that have stopped looking for work. And it also is a skewed figure from what we used to have, because now they include military people into the denominator, so the figure is actually less than what it used to be in the comparison. And so you also have 6.5 million people that have been unemployed for longer than 6 months. 5 people looking for every job out there. That's the policies, that's the result of a low-wage, high-consumption strategy. Now we have to change that. And Tom, I would disagree with you about one thing that you said. You said the first recession that we had U'd out, instead of a V with unemployment, U'd out in 2003. It wasn't. The first one actually happened in 91. The 91 recession was the first recession where unemployment didn't go like this. It actually went like this. The 2003 recession like this. The recession we're in like this is now down here. So it'll take a longer period of time to get out. So we've proffered 5 things in the short term that need to be done in the short term. One, fiscal spending must continue, because we are threatened worldwide by the deficit hawks that want to contract that spending, and if it does, it threatens to push us back into recession or depression. So we have 5 points short term that we think ought to happen. The first thing is we ought to invest in long-term infrastructure, and I know Tom agrees with that. We agree wholeheartedly on that point. Long-term infrastructure can make the country far more efficient, far more capable of competing in the world, and can create massive number of jobs in the process. The second thing is we do need to extend unemployment benefits and health care benefits, because we can't afford to have 6.5 million workers stop spending. If they stop spending, the economy starts to go back again. So there needs to be an extension of unemployment benefits. The third thing we recommend is aid to state and local governments, because as the federal government spending has increased to stimulate the economy, state and local spending has dropped, and we're almost to the point right now where it's neutralized, where the government spending is neutralized, and you're starting to see the economy sputter right now.
And state and local governments, you're talking about layoffs there.
Correct. About 900,000 we estimate, over 300,000 teachers, which will cripple education at a time when we should be building education. So that cuts back on us. That's the third thing. The fourth thing is some direct job creation. Target areas where we have a high unemployment area, high unemployment level, and go in and create direct jobs. I'll give you an example. Go into a school district where you're having trouble with scores and education. Create tutors. The federal government could create tutors. It's a twofer. It creates jobs, and at the same time, it helps solve a problem. We have a lot of those out there. We don't want these to be substitutes for existing jobs, because that does nothing. And then the last thing that we think needs to happen is that we ought to take the TARP money that's been repaid and the TARP money that hasn't been spent, give it to regional banks to loan it out to small and mid-sized business, so that small and mid-sized business can actually start creating jobs. That's the short-term solution. But what we have is, so we have a short-term job crisis. We don't have a short-term deficit crisis. But the short-term, the hysteria for the short-term deficit crisis really does threaten the entire recovery worldwide. So it's dangerous to the economy. It's dangerous to the future competitiveness, and we desperately need to invest in infrastructure to make ourselves competitive.
So now, I'd anticipated, I'm coming to you forthwith, I promise. But I anticipated in talking to Rich before this session that this was going to this had the potential of morphing into what is presumably the key economic debate of the moment, which is, austerity versus stimulus, bailouts versus budget cutting. And that's true everywhere in the world. I'm just back from Spain, Greece, and France, and that's the central question that keeps being asked there. But we've moved to the point here in this discussion, all right, we all know how terrible things are. Here's what Rich, and you were nodding your head in agreement the whole time there, Secretary Solis, what this flank is in favor of. So, Tom, he said you were in favor of long-term infrastructure. What about the other 4?
Well, I think it would be very useful for the purpose of having this discussion if, after making just 2 comments about what's been said, I give sort of my 5 ideas.
Great.
And then we look at them. There are some similar, some different. For the record, the Chamber of Commerce of the United States supported the TARP money, vigorously supported the stimulus package, even when we knew it was a turkey in terms of what was in the package. But we were on the edge of a global, going over the edge on a global depression. So contrary to what most of our members wanted, we went out and got really into that.
When you say we, you...
No, the chamber.
You mean yourself?
Hey, worked, didn't it?
I wasn't complaining. I was just clarifying.
As many of you know, we were very aggressive in helping on the GM Chrysler and the Clunkers deal. And so there's, very, very important to understand that everybody cares about the people in this country. I mean, we'll deal with our disagreements in a minute. But let me just make 2 points about what the Secretary said, and then I'll put the 5. First of all, Madam Secretary, I really agree with your point that we're going to have, in some form or shape, we're going to try and find these 20 million jobs, and we have 20 million people who'll be looking for them. The point I think you were making, we're not going to have 20 million people prepared to do them, because we do have serious questions when 30% of the people in this country do not graduate from high school in 4 or 5 years, and when, as you indicated, Madam Secretary, they need more education than what they can get in high school, and I think that's a big issue. The only other thing I wanted to comment on is, America has not lost its manufacturing business. America is the first or second, depending on what week you look at, largest manufacturer in the world. And we're doing far more high-tech manufacturing. Sure, we've moved the jobs around the country, but we are huge manufacturers. But the big thing is because, as Rich indicated, that we had these productivity increases, and I don't really know where to go on this. We're doing so much more work with so many fewer people. And why are we doing that? Because we use information technology, we use supply chain management, we use all kinds of new manufacturing techniques. We've done it so much better that you use so few people, and I guess that's a really, important thing to debate. How are we going to cover these people going forward? So now, my 5 things, and I'll show you where I think we're together and where we're not. I think if 95% of the people in the world that have the ability to consume something that we want to sell to them live somewhere else, it's a good deal to get into the trading business and to do it in a more vigorous way. The President of the United States ran for office saying that's a bad idea. He gave his State of the Union address saying it was a good idea. He didn't do anything on the trade agreements and other issues, but now, as this job issue has become a very hot topic, he's in the last week and a half is beginning to move in the direction of the trade agreements. If we don't do the Columbia, and by the way, if we ever owe somebody for their support of our country and for their courage, it's Columbia. And if we don't do Korea, Canada and the EU have already made agreements with them. And we're going to lose 350,000 jobs. We're not going to gain any. So we need to do that. If we could, all of us together, ever do a global trade agreement, it would create trillions of dollars of new opportunity for everyone. So I think the trade issue, if you can double your exports in 5 years and double them again in 5 years, you can create a lot of jobs. The second thing where I think Rich and I are in absolute agreement is infrastructure. Now, everybody thinks about infrastructure, they say it's roads and bridges. Yeah, it is, and therefore we ought to get the highway bill passed. We're working together on that. Those guys up on the Hill are all playing a lot of games with that deal. We haven't increased the fuel tax, the national fuel tax in the United States in 16 years. We put twice the wear and tear on the roads because we get all the much more miles per gallon, and we need to put that money into building roads and bridges. Then we need to go get a lot of private money. There's about $300 billion worth of private money sitting around right now waiting to invest in infrastructure, in broadband, in electrical transmission, in electrical generation, in nuclear power, and all that sort of thing. And we need to go do that. Public money, but huge amounts of private money, because that will create real jobs. I think the next thing Rich and I would also agree with, and that is there are some green jobs that'll create a lot of some green projects that'll create a lot of jobs. And, you know, some will not, because most of the green energy issues and so on are all subsidized in their development stage. But if we went out to do, if you look at France, they get 70% of their electrical power from nuclear power. It happens to be a very safe thing to do. We've given that business away in this country. We've got to get back in that business. If you want to clean the air and the water and the land, if you want to find new ways to use new coal technology, and there's a guy who knows something about coal, and we can put a lot of money into that from the private and public sector. I think we'll call them green jobs. I would agree, and I hope we would agree, that we go out and get public and private money, because you can't do this all on public money. It's going to go tilt. So I'm all for that.
For clarification, when you go out and get private money,
it's there.
So this means provide public incentives, matching.
Yeah, some of that in the green job side, yes. In the infrastructure
but
side,
that's how you induce the private money to come in.
No,
you give them tax incentives, something like that.
But there is a massive effort going on all over the world where people that have capital see investing in the physical structures of countries, of geographic areas, is one of the long-term best investments they can make.
Tom, if I could just add to that, to answer your question.
Yeah.
If the federal government, if state governments make a commitment, a long-term commitment, and I'm talking about a 10 to 15 to 20-year commitment to infrastructure, it will begin to crowd in private investment.
I see. So a commitment to build something,
right.
Then you get the people who say,
That's
okay,
correct.
there's a commitment, I will
Well,
therefore
let me give you a
up.
crazy example. If you want to build a nuclear power plant, as you know, for years, you know, you get halfway there and then the environmental, one suit after the other. You don't even have to put up the money. All you have to say, look, here are the 12 rules. You follow the rules, you build the plant, you meet all the standards, and if the next day, because of a lot of lawsuits, you can't open the plant, the government will write you a check with interest for everything you've spent. Guess what? The government isn't going to be supporting all those lawsuits. It's going to be opening the plants. So the deal is. Now, two last things, I'll stop. We have got to get capital to small and medium-sized companies. The large companies in America are sitting on a lot of cash. I'll tell you why in 30 seconds. But we have just been through this re-regulation of the capital markets, which, by the way, in addition to everything you read about, it brings you 355 rulemakings, 47 studies, and 74 reports. That'll take about 10 years. And all this, if we're lucky.
Job creation, though.
Yeah, probably. Job creation that is being paid for by the private sector in taxes because it's being done by the public sector. Or maybe jobs creation in the private sector, too, because we have to hire a lot of people to deal with the rules. All right, so we've got to get capital. We've got to look at this system and figure out how to get capital back there because, as Rich said, he wanted to use the TARP money. I'd rather pay off the TARP money and declare that as a success. And then if we have to go get some more money, let's go get it. Because otherwise, all the TARP money goes away, and 5 years from now, everybody said that was a bust. It wasn't. The banks have paid the money back. The final thing, let's just assume for a minute you're running a company, mid-size, large, small. The biggest problem you've got right now is uncertainty. Now, there's always uncertainty and risk in running anything. But this is all uncertainty. What really is all that health care going to cost, the new system? And we're already finding out, and hadn't been around for a couple of weeks, the cost's going to be much higher than we thought. What is all the capital market stuff going to cost? And we're going to find out. What is all
stuff meaning the regulation?
Yeah. And what is it going to cost us? What is this tax bill everybody's talking about that we're going to do at the end of after the election? What's that going to cost? What are we going to do with the new suggestions coming out of the EPA or with the new bill that might come out? And if any one or two or three of those things you had to deal with, you'd figure it out. But if you have all of those, man, I'm keeping my cash in my jeans. I'm going to wait and see what's going on because I have got to sustain this company. I've got to keep my stock up. If I don't keep my stock up, they get rid of me. So the bottom line is, I think if we could get rid of some of that uncertainty, we could do better. We probably are in the same place on 50% of the stuff.
Sounds like more than 50%. Sounds
on
like
the 50%,
sounds like I can't figure out what the
we ought to
problem
go
is.
do
I
it.
mean, everybody.
So can I?
Yeah. Well,
So I can tell you two problems. As we are sitting here talking about the importance of education, which you agree with, which you agree with, which you agree with, which I certainly agree with, because I'm in the education business. Sort of. The state of California is laying off public school teachers. The state of California, with a master plan made by Edmund G. Brown, which promised a certain level of high school degree, you got to go to a junior college. Another certain level, you got to go to the state college system. Another level at the upper 12.5%, you got to go to the California University of California system, which was a world-class system. We are in the process of dismantling that system. So as we sit here and talk about doing a bunch of stuff, the opposite is going on. So one problem is, as we are talking, Rome is literally burning. We can all agree on the importance of education, but the realities on the ground are that it has been very good for Stanford. We have been able to hire a lot of talented people out of the University of California as the support of the state has eroded and continues to erode. They've had wage givebacks and all kinds of things. So I think that is the one issue, is that while we are talking about spending on infrastructure, including educational infrastructure, we're moving in the wrong direction, and it is harder to repair a problem than it is to prevent it in the first place. Well, to take California down. And let me say one other thing. With all due respect to my dear colleague here on my right, there is, I hear the stories about the regulatory costs and the regulatory burdens and the regulatory overhead, and I understand that, and I hear this from my friends in business as well. But I will point out, as I've already alluded to, that when you go look at which countries are running the largest surpluses of trade, which countries are doing the best in terms of competitiveness according to The Economist magazine, which is, Lord knows, not some left-wing magazine. If you look at the World Economic Forum lists of competitive countries, many of them, they are countries which have more of the things that you don't like. Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, Finland, Germany that have...
Well, the first, before you said Germany, that sort of adds up to Massachusetts. It does. You put those...
Actually, I'm from Massachusetts, and it's considerably larger than Massachusetts.
Well,
Sweden alone is larger than
I'm
Massachusetts.
talking about economics.
Sweden's economy is larger than Massachusetts. But I take the point.
Paul, let me...
Just to be clear here, though.
Sure. Were you done? Jeffrey, I was just going to give you some good news about education.
Well, it's good news that you guys agree
I
with
thought you
that
were going to
stuff.
give him good news about California.
Well,
that would be impossible.
Rome may be burning for a lot of education. The labor movement really is moving ahead with educating workers. We have 1,100 training centers around the country right now where we're training people for the green jobs of the future. We've also started going out in the minority communities and other communities and doing pre-apprenticeship training, where people that don't have the math skills, the science skills, the reading skills, the English skills, we're bringing them up to par and then bringing them into our apprenticeship programs. And we're teaching them not just a trade where you do solar panels, but they be able to have a career in environmentally sound things. So we're pretty happy about that.
I applaud that.
That's good.
And I'm glad you're doing it. And American business spent something in the area of $60 billion, I won't say last year, but on an annual basis for a long time on training, and much of it was remedial. And I think we would also agree we should do all the training, but I don't think we should have to, in the most sophisticated country in the world, have to do all that remedial training to teach people that come out of our school system how to read, write, and count.
We're partnering with junior colleges around and community colleges around the country to try to do just that, to get remedial skills up, to get math and science skills up so that we can actually prepare them for jobs that we see are coming. But don't forget, you still have to create those jobs, and that's not what we're doing. If you look at what our competitors are doing, take in low carbon technology. China's investing 2 times as much as the United States is. They've decided that they're going to capture the green market. They're going after solar, they're going after wind, geothermal. Take high-speed rail. We've planned 500 miles of high-speed rail in this country this year. 500 miles. Sounds good. China has 5,000 miles already in progress that they'll have completed this year. So it's a matter of us as a nation deciding that that becomes a priority. And, you know, I could go through the 4 drivers with you of the economy, Tom, and maybe I should. We see 4 drivers of the economy, and I'm sure you'll agree. One is private consumption, personal consumption. And you don't consume if you don't have wages. So if we don't reestablish the link between productivity and wages in this country, you won't have that solid foundation to build on. The second one is business investment. That's not occurring because of some of the uncertainty, but because we have an aggregate demand problem in this country. We have an aggregate demand problem. Why is a corporation going to build something new capacity, when they're not using the current capacity that they have, or they don't know if it's going to increase? The third is not just exports, Tom, because you keep talking about increasing exports, which is important, but the real driver of the economy are net exports. If you want to have an increase to GDP, you have net exports. A net import strategy gives you a drag on GDP, and we haven't had a net exports in this country for years. If you want to do that, you have to go after Chinese currency manipulation and a number of other things, enforce the laws. Tom doesn't think we ought to do some stuff that we disagree on that issue. We both know there's a currency manipulation problem. He thinks we ought to leave it to the market to take place. We've said since 2003 we've been trying that, and we have a $1.5 trillion deficit, trade deficit since then. Massive drag on GDP in this country. So we have to cure that. And the fourth driver, of course, of the economy is government spending. And we agree that government spending can't go on forever. But what we may disagree on is that now is not the time to cut it off, because the recovery is nascent, it is sputtering, and if we have a worldwide fiscal austerity, it will push us back into recession and possibly depression, and there is no economist in their right mind that'll say different than that.
All right, so I want to take these points and get a little narrower, as opposed to, you know, the 5 here, the 9 here, the 11 here, just because it's hard for me to follow, so I assume it's hard for everybody else to follow as well. Just on this point about austerity, I thought I heard you saying that you were for spending more now. Is that correct? Did I miss something?
No, what I said, 2 things. One, we supported at a very critical time in this country the stimulus program.
You did support it?
We did support it.
So what about now?
That's the second point. You have to take that apart. From a personal perspective and from a chamber perspective, we would support the continuation of unemployment insurance.
Bravo.
So why isn't
Time out.
I know, I'm the moderator, whatever. I said the panelist. I guess that was.
And I think, you know, on the healthcare side, which are very much tied into the unemployment issue, we don't want anybody in this country to be denied healthcare. And by the way, while we have all our arguments about healthcare, the law says that if somebody shows up at an emergency room, you have to take care of them, and we ought to do better than that. Now, when you get to the next set of issues, and remember it's an election time, so all the guys up in the House and the Senate, and you're not there anymore, so it's okay. All the people in the House and the Senate, everybody,
for those who didn't hear her.
Everybody has every kind of idea you can practically think about where they want to throw money at this problem. And my issue is, let's get rational people together, let's take care of unemployment, and let's figure out what part of that government money is really going to create jobs, is really serious, and if we can come to some agreement on that. And let's take all of these political suggestions and let's be very careful, because the point we do agree on, there is a limit on how long we can push this government spending. So if we're going to do it, let's spend it smart so we keep getting a return from it.
Tom, we ought to be able to agree on two things that aren't gimmicky or anything, that will save or create jobs. One is unemployment benefits. Yeah. We know that gets spent immediately, it spurs the economy, and if you contract, so we ought to be able to agree on that.
One other thing.
No, on that
subject.
Wait, well, I'll let you come back, but one other thing. One other thing. We ought to be able to agree that we need aid to state and local governments so that contraction at the state and local governments doesn't negate the increase in federal spending and create a situation where there is no stimulus.
Okay, stop.
Well
stop,
said.
Yes?
All right. And by the way, what you said about unemployment insurance is right. I agree we should do it. The argument that Nancy Pelosi's making, this is the greatest job creator in the world, is bunk. Unemployment insurance is going to give people the dignity of being able to feed their families and do that sort of stuff. How much it's going to stimulate the economy, I'm not ready to stipulate to. The next issue that you raised about states, obviously there are things we're going to have to do with the states. Eventually, Rome is going belly up, and that's California, and then you and I will figure out what we think about that. But the point is, and it is, I mean, it's got a $63 billion deficit.
So is the government going to bail out California to some extent, yes?
Maybe. I don't know what they're going to do. But my bottom line is, we haven't had to decide that. I think we would agree, what the states did over the last 20 years is try and duplicate the federal system. They built all the same kinds of, they have, every kind of department. They're spending more money than ever spent in history. And I don't just want to pay for that. I'm willing to help the states, but they've got to make some accommodations on what's going on in their own expenditures.
Secretary Solis, do the states have to make some kind of accommodation? You're somebody who knows a lot about this. You've been in the state legislature.
I agree that there has to be more rational thinking about spending. But in cases like California, you really have some old formulas that don't work. You have to have a 2/3 majority just to get a budget through. So the minority party will always control that effort. That's why we haven't been able to reach a compromise on a budget, and why the governor now, I think, is trying to lay out a plan where he'd like to pay state workers minimum wage, which I don't agree with. I think that's going in the wrong direction. I would hope that there could be some really good compromises that could be made, but not at the expense of the quality of life of what citizens from that state want. I mean, if you want local law enforcement, you want fire protection, you want clean water, you want good schools, someone is going to have to pay for that. And it shouldn't all just fall on one segment of our society. It should be spread around, and I think that's where you have to close loopholes. Why allow for these big loopholes for folks to get away with not paying what everyone else has to pay for? And I think that's a discussion that we haven't had here either, that may be worth talking about.
Just as an aside, as somebody from California, when you hear that California is going down,
I'm concerned. I'm very concerned because, I mean, I'm a product of the public education system there. I know how great our state universities are. I know that they've helped to lift so many people up in so many ways, and to see that students can't afford to even go through a 4-year education. Now it's taken them 7 years because you don't have enough faculty available, and all the things that are just a compilation of our neglect for higher education, I think, sends a bad signal, and it gives another signal to our foreign competitors that they're gonna mass produce engineers, physicists, doctors at a higher rate, and they have been, than we have. I mean, and that is really surprising, and I think about the demographic changes. And if we continue to avoid putting investments in education, then we are setting ourselves up to really be far behind and becoming another society that I just don't even want to think about.
Yeah, by the way, just as another depressing fact, is that we graduate about 27% of Americans after a certain age have a 4-year degree. That ranks us 15th in the world. That number, for the first time in history, is possibly going down now. And that has never happened
Probably
before.
will during the recession, but...
Well, no, but also because of the immigration, the nature of the immigrants who are coming in, and whether or not they get as much of as degrees as people in the past. It's a very controversial issue, but it does seem to be the case.
But you know, if you look at California only as a microcosm of the country, what's going on in California? 3 or 4 things. First of all, it is the highest taxed entity, one of the highest taxed entities in the world. Second, people and companies and individuals are moving out of California like it's going out of style because of the tax base, because of the regulatory base. Even though it's the access to Asia, it's got tremendous climate. Third, you know, in the Central Valley of California, there's 40% unemployment. You know why? That's the food belt. It's because there's a big fight going on between water and fish, between people and fish. And because of some little fish, we're not running the water into the valley. They got 40% unemployment, and the farmers are taking this stuff to Mexico.
Come on, well, that's a little.
It's true. It is fundamentally true in the Central Valley.
No, Tom, let's not go there.
That's the view of the world.
This is a
okay,
controversial.
There's 40%
You're better than that, Tom.
unemployment in the Central Valley of California, and it's about water.
I heard it all now. Fish caused the unemployment in the country. I'll quote you on that, Tom.
No,
well, you probably will.
every time I get the chance.
Right.
That's the kind of statement that we do not allow to go unchallenged on the NewsHour, but we don't have time for it here.
Okay.
So that's all. I want to leave it. Not the 40%. Not the 40%. So we have at least
and
one
it's about not being able to run the water for that reason.
It is, as I understand it, at least somewhat more complicated than that. It's not just the fish, yes. But at any rate.
Well, we're coming closer than not at all.
All right. You're making tremendous progress. But I wanted to, we got 15 minutes left. I'd love to get the audience in on this. We're sort of in lots of different areas. I have a number of things that I thought I would follow up on. But I just as soon get people from the audience to come in, since you're all here, and maybe I can focus it. There are mics up right
Good
there,
luck.
so please just come to the mic, brief identification, and I really will cut off comments. Just a question and as pointed as possible, and to the people who are here, so as specific as possible. Please, ma'am.
Judy Samuelson, the Aspen Institute. Both the AFL and the Chamber have spoken out on short-termism in business and capital markets. You gave an important speech on saying companies need to stop providing quarterly earnings guidance and think longer term. The AFL's done a lot of work here. You connected this piece about lack of R&D, perhaps, or there's growing evidence lack of R&D in business because of the companies essentially worrying about their stock price going down. Is there some solution space here in the tax system, something to encourage longer-term focus and more R&D by business?
I can say something. Right now, under the extenders plan in the Senate, there is a provision there to help expand tax credits for R&D. In fact, Democrats and folks from both sides of the aisle, I believe, have always supported that. But again, it's getting caught up in the rhetoric and the politics of midterm elections, which I think is unreasonable. And I for one, can see the value in seeing that we provide more incentives for more research, for people to be able to patent their inventions and all the things that have made us great in the past.
And let's have these answers be short, too.
Sure.
Yeah, please, Rich.
I'll try to be very short. Just remember this, R&D follows manufacturing. As manufacturing is shut down and moved offshore, R&D has followed it. We have less R&D money being spent now than we need, so we really need to bring back manufacturing. The other part of it is a lot of the space program. With the phasing down of the space program, a lot of R&D and a lot of products that we use, from cell phones and computers to everything else, we're losing that technological edge from everything in green jobs with solar cells and everything else. We're losing that fight right now because we as a nation aren't really committed to it.
And that's what Andy Grove makes this argument in great detail in Bloomberg Business Week. But now, you were the person who brought up this issue of the markets and playing to the stock market. So what's the answer?
I don't have one, unfortunately. I mean, it is really an issue of values and how we think about what our responsibilities are as business people. 40 or 50 years ago, the idea of stakeholder as opposed to stockholder capitalism was much more abroad in the land, and the idea that business people thought that they had an obligation to balance the interests of employees and customers and shareholders and the community, and that they really sat in this position of trying to negotiate among a set of competing demands, and those days are kind of gone in terms of at least many of the business people who I talk to.
Tom, you're even nodding here.
I support the R&D thing fully, and we ought to move it. I support and have pushed for a long period of time to get rid of quarterly pressure. I mean, you can't manage a huge business and expect to hit it by a penny every quarter. That's just ridiculous. But remember who's driving a lot of this stuff. It's the investors, the people of the United States, the individual investors, and you know, the professional investors take a long-term look. Some of the hedge funds that are driving tremendous pressure against these companies, we're going to have to find some ways to do this because we're in a global system, and if they don't do it here, they'll do it somewhere else.
Well, could I just say this? I would genuinely look forward to working with you on trying to figure out a way to end the short-termism that we agree is driving bad decisions and hollowing out companies. I'd really enjoy working with you on that.
Hey, look, if an AFL-CIO, U.S. Chamber of Commerce initiative on fighting short-termism comes out of this was an extremely useful session, if nothing else happened. Please, sir.
Ezra Klein from the Washington Post. And coming from Washington, it seems there's a lot more agreement when people get to Aspen. But we know
Congress is here too.
This must be the mountains. So we know that companies right now are sitting on about $1.8 trillion in reserves, and presumably that's because there's a lack of confidence. And I'd like to hear the panel go around and say what they think is at the base of that lack of confidence. Is it fear that there's not enough aggregate demand, fear of future business decisions or political decisions, or the third explanation you hear, fear of another downturn or some sort of a risk that we can't anticipate?
Great. So the question is, why are they sitting on, according to Ezra, well, he said 1.8 trillion, but let's...
It's probably 1.8
trillion
trillion about now.
Yeah, trillion. Okay, so...
Well, first of all, they sit on some amount of it anyway because you've got to have a capital base in the company. They're sitting now because there's the unsure nature of decisions are what's going to happen in this next tax bill that everybody knows, if you look at these deficits, is going to be unbelievable. What are the costs of all these new things we've just done? Huge. And what are the requirements on me? And how am I going to deal with that? And these issues are significant. Then move to yours. What about markets? What about what's going on globally? Look, they do the same thing we do. They get up in the morning and look at the newspaper. You guys write it.
So, but it's all your fault, Ezra.
No, it's not. It's not all your fault, but there is a churning, a driving that have got people on their edge because you got great stories to write about.
But what about Rich's point about aggregate demand, which Ezra raised? Aggregate demand part of it is not enough aggregate demand, and well, so why would you
I don't think in the middle of one of the second most serious recession that we've ever been in, that aggregate demand would be where we want it.
So therefore, if you're running a company, you go, hey, I'm not sure I'm going to
invest. But if I'm running the company, I'm protecting my home, my assets, my capital, and I'm waiting to see why some of this moves out, and then I'll move. By the way, there's a really interesting thing going on with all that money. What are we going to buy? And, you know, folks are saying, okay, now maybe I'll buy that Chinese company, or maybe I'll go over. There was a great suggestion in one of the previous sessions today that the Mexicans ought to go out and buy up all these drilling companies whose values are way, way down, and then they'll solve their problem in the Gulf. Look, this is a global system. It's not simply of looking at what's happening in the U.S.
What's the reason they're sitting on the money?
I think they're sitting on the money because they're afraid, and also because people tend to follow the crowd. So if some people begin to spend and they invest, other people will begin to spend and invest.
True.
And confidence builds on itself, and at the moment, everybody is nervous.
Right.
I think that's correct. I think people are not feeling as confident. But I also think there's a major restructuring that's going on, contraction in our economy, but also in our regulations. The banking industry, Wall Street, healthcare reform, all these things have impacted the way that we administer our programs and services. And to be honest, I think we're trying to level the playing field for the first time for consumers and working families. And I think that we get lost in that when we just talk about profits and folks that are making tremendous amounts of money and sitting on it, while other people are sitting home fearing that they're going to lose their homes. We've got major foreclosure problems occurring in the state of California, Nevada, and other parts of the country. We still want to see some recovery occurring in the areas in the Northeast, also in places like Las Vegas and California. And we need to have this capital. We need to have that movement. That's the first thing I hear every time I go out. Why are we not seeing more capital, more lending, more favorable positions made for small and medium-sized businesses and minority-owned businesses?
And also people, and isn't it also the case that lenders certainly are scared to lend to people because they're afraid of the very same things that keep companies from investing? Please, sir.
Don Spiro, Bethesda, Maryland. I think everybody agrees that education is a primary issue in getting these problems solved. And a key issue is teachers. And addressing that problem has a lot of impediments because of labor unions, seniority, lockstep pay, tenure. So I wonder what the panel thinks about that. And a quick question for the right side of the panel, asserting that the U.S. is #2 in manufacturing, does that include correcting for offshore jobs, or is it based on revenues or employment?
Let's just quickly redress that one.
It's domestic manufacturing.
So you're talking about manufacturing in the U.S.?
Right.
Okay, I didn't know it was that high.
Keep shrinking. Keep shrinking,
It's shrinking,
and shrinking and shrinking.
It does
More's
shrink.
going offshore.
It shrinks in the number of people that are employed
Because
in
of
it,
high productivity.
driven in part because of high productivity.
Okay.
Well, that's just not true. we can go on. Productivity has something to do with it, but when you close down a plant here and you move it to China, that wasn't productivity.
Well, that's what I was asking about.
And you're seeing much of that. There's much offshoring that is cutting into manufacturing.
I was asking if that was included in his calculation. He says it is.
Well, let's leave it as a disagreement for the time being.
We agree on the concept that to get into the details, all the devil's in the details.
Yes, no, but the point is both of these are factors, clearly, in cheaper labor, offshore.
Productivity increases.
And productivity increases as well. So they're both part. But your first question was, I forgot.
The whole thing about
Education, teachers,
Oh,
labor
education
unions.
teachers. Well, but isn't that directed largely to Rich Trumka? I mean, that is
whoever wants to answer it, but I think so.
Are unions cause part of the problem, or Secretary Solis, either of you, with regard to?
I know it's not your union, sir. But
there are instances where you can find out where a union is an impediment. By and large, that's not the case. The unions right now, the teachers' unions, really do want to find a solution to all of this. And what we have a tendency to do in this country is scapegoat. We don't have jobs, and let me give you 4 or 5 examples of that. We don't have jobs, it's the immigrants' fault. We don't have this, it's somebody else's fault. I lost my job, it's feminism. All of those interests, and one of the other issues is, education isn't good, it's the teacher's fault. Look, it's the system.
Let me respond. Having unfortunately watched a number of school boards, some of which I have on DVD, the solution, everybody believes that unions with their seniority rights and their job protections are impediment to flexibility in terms of hiring great teachers, and that may in fact be true, but the opposite is not enlightened people like yourself hiring teachers. The opposite is oftentimes jobs that are sold, as they were in New York City prior to Rudy Cruz's arrival and him bringing in the FBI, where you could buy a principalship for $40,000 from a legal school board. This is actually documented from illegal school board members. Or you hire your relatives, or you hire all these other things. Prior to what we now have come to see as various forms of HR bureaucracy, either done by unions or inside companies, there is a historical record that says, you know, jobs were given away to relatives, to friends for sexual favors. They were sold. There are all kinds of stuff. So the idea that we're going to get rid of the union protections and replace them with some kind of enlightened hiring where the best people get hired is possible, but it is not guaranteed.
Oh, excuse me, I wasn't really asking about hiring the best ones. The question is whether you can fire the bottom 5%.
Well, wait a second, but most of the schools in the country aren't unionized. There's no impediment there. There's still a problem. Okay. How do you answer that one?
School boards, I don't know what
we're moving on.
Okay, good.
We're moving on.
Hey, Bobby.
Hi, Bob Hormetz, State Department. I just want to make 2 quick points and then ask a question. The point's been made that we're in a very, very competitive global economy and we are very short-term oriented, whereas many countries are much longer-term oriented. Just 2 quick points. One, on education. It's quite clear from the way when you look at the world and the educational efforts of other countries, that we're not going to have a world-class economy 20 years from now unless we have a world-class educational system now, because this is critical to the future, not just at higher education levels, but throughout the educational system. That is really one of the short-term elements that we need to deal with very quickly if we're going to have a competitive long-term future. Second, the question of infrastructure. We have a budget deficit problem, we have a jobs problem. Tom and Rich have both made the point, if we can leverage private sector money with a little bit of government incentive, we can create a lot of jobs without widening the budget deficit. We ought to be devoting a lot more creativity to doing this. Other countries are. This brings me to the third question, and that is structural unemployment, long-term unemployment, which I think is a profoundly disturbing issue. Atlantic Magazine had a very good piece on this a little while ago. If people can't get jobs now, and they can't get good jobs, and they can't get training now, then they're going to be disadvantaged the rest of their lives. This is a huge long-term social and economic problem for our country. The question I have is whether other countries who are experiencing similar things and have for some time have programs we could learn from. Is there an ongoing effort or can there be an ongoing effort of engagement with other countries like Germany, which deals with some of these problems, to learn what they've done, that they've tested over a period of time, and see if there are a number of these programs that we can incorporate into our thinking to develop programs now for the future.
Are we doing that, Madam Secretary?
Well, I know that Germany has some fantastic programs, and they've actually kept employees in different industries. I mean, we know that automobile industry, for example. We're looking at also trying to expand our job training programs, on-the-job training, to keep people on board. They can train up, go to a community college, but also stay at that place of employment so you don't lose that talent. Someone's out for 6 months, you're again going to make it harder for that company to come back if you're losing that brain trust.
And while we're forming alliances here, I would suggest the State Department and the Department of Labor could work together to work with other governments, find out what they're doing and see if we can use them here.
We are doing it. We just had a major labor minister meeting at the Department of Labor in April. We had the G20 labor ministers there for the first time in history because of our president's tenacity to talk about protections for workers, but also scaling up our training programs across the globe.
That's terrific.
So good. So you guys can meet together. You guys can meet together. And
all right.
This is going to be one of the great, most successful networking sessions in the history of Aspen. Yeah.
I suggest we stay here and do it.
Please. I got another panel to moderate, but you guys go right ahead.
I'm Toby Rogers. I'm a student in the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. And this is a question and a comment, but I'd like the reactions of President Trumka and Secretary Solis.
Just one question to you. Is it as bad as is portrayed at Berkeley now?
Well,
you get yes or no?
No.
Okay, good.
But long term it will be.
But long term it will be.
Short
Okay,
term
great.
it's not, long term it will be. The comment I have is, it seems to me that really this is the NAFTA and WTO recession. The reason the recovery is jobless is because we're creating jobs in China and in Mexico, but we've sold out an entire generation of Americans who don't have a college education by our trade policies. And it seems to me we're not going to get long-term recovery of wages until we renegotiate our trade policies And that begins with renegotiating NAFTA and the WTO.
Okay, we had
No, he asked
No, I
them.
know what
Oh,
Tom's
you
gonna
asked
say.
them, but you're the one who said, what the hell is that? So,
Well, I
Well,
didn't
clearly
quite.
Tom's not going to agree with that, but what would Secretary Trumka or
okay,
they-
so,
they agree.
so you're,
President Trumka or
all right,
Secretary
so then-
Solis say to that?
Specifically, the question again, is NAFTA part of it? Absolutely. The trade laws in this country are absolutely part of it. The lack of labor laws, effective labor laws in this country are part of it. You have fewer than 12.5% with collective bargaining, so profits can't get shared like they did before. Tom says we ought to do Colombia, where they just murdered 2 trade unionists just the other day, and he says we ought to do Korea, where all of their impediments, all of their trade barriers for automobiles haven't been removed by that trade agreement, yet they want to do the trade agreement. That's part of it. The tax code is part of it as well. In sending people to take jobs offshore does not help us in this country. It helps companies, but what we have to do, our biggest thing, let me just leave him with this, our biggest goal has to be to realign the interest of multinationals with the interests of their countries, because they will pursue their own interests, even if it is to the detriment of this country. Our biggest job is to realign those interests, and in the long term, we end up all winning.
Secretary Solis, last word here. And we don't have time for other questions because we've run out of time, right?
I think that now is a time for us to revisit and work with our trade partners and try to really look at how we don't disadvantage American manufacturers, and I said that earlier. And the president has said he wants to really beef up exportation of our products. But right now, under some circumstances, we are disadvantaged. And as Rich just outlined, there are some barriers there that have to be looked at. So I totally agree with some of the things you're saying. I know that it's going to take some time, though, because we can't just pull out of trade agreements that have been set into place now. We have to work with our partners, educate them, give them technical training, and that's what the Department of Labor is doing through the International Labor Affairs Bureau right now. In fact, we're working with El Salvador, Nicaragua, Jordan, Cambodia, where we have some agreements that are going on to help level the playing field, pay higher wages, minimum wage in some cases, and teach people also social responsibility and protections for workers in other countries.
Thank you all very much. Thank you all for coming and participating.